Skeletal Chapter 2. Bennett blinked awake as light suddenly flooded the living room. He squinted against the glare, momentarily disoriented, before remembering he had fallen asleep on the couch. Gazing towards the window, Bennett saw that it was nearly dark. He called out, but there was no answer, and he realized that his mother was late getting home from work. Sitting up on the couch, he reached for his phone on the coffee table, but the battery had died while he was napping. With a sigh, he plugged it into the charger, and a few seconds later, the screen lit up to a barrage of notifications cascading down the screen. 4 missed calls and 3 texts from Sophia, 1 from his mother. A knot of unease formed in his stomach as he called Sophie back, rising from the couch and pacing the living room. "Finally, I've been trying to reach you for hours." Sophie's voice was breathless, an undercurrent of tension noticeable in her words. Bennett rubbed his eyes. "Sorry, I fell asleep and my phone died. What's going on?" "I found some stuff, but I don't want to talk about it over the phone. Can you come over?" Bennett hesitated, glancing at the darkening windows. "I need to wait until my mom gets home. She texted that she's bringing groceries since the power was out, but I'll come over after if that's cool." "Okay, yeah, that works. Just come as soon as you can, alright?" The apprehension in Sophia's tones set Bennett's nerves on edge. "I will. See you soon." He hung up, mind racing with possibilities as he replayed the events of the afternoon in his mind. What had they stumbled into in that abandoned house? An hour later, Bennett stepped out into the night. A light wind rustled the leaves above him as he made his way down the street to Sophia's house, hands shoved deep in his pockets. He found her waiting on the front porch. She stood up as he approached, her face pale and pinched with worry. "Hey," Bennett greeted cautiously. "What's going on?" Sophia took a shaky breath. "The language that the papers are written in? It's called Theban script. It's an occult alphabet used in witchcraft and magic." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Ben, the stuff described on those pages, it's really dark. Animating corpses, laying curses on people, taking revenge on enemies." She pulled out her phone and opened to a photo she had taken at the house. "See those diagrams? The ones next to the skeleton? They're instructions for a ritual." Bennett studied the images, a chill creeping down his spine. The intricate sigils and symbols seemed to writhe on the screen. "What kind of ritual?" Sophie slowly shook her head. "Something to do with the bones, but I don't know what. I didn't take pictures of all the pages." She scrolled through the images. "The pages we found inside the witch's house, those are warnings. They warn trespassers that a price will be paid for disturbing her house. They describe meddling with something dangerous, but in a way that doesn't make sense without knowing what the next page says. But this," Sophia swallowed hard as she brought up the next image, "this one that creeped me out the worst, is a spell for summoning spirits to gain power. That's where she describes getting revenge on her enemies by using blood and eating flesh." She looked Bennett in the eyes. Bennett met Sophia's wide, fearful gaze. The night suddenly felt oppressive, the shadows deeper and longer. The breeze rattled through the branches, making them whisper like conspiring voices. The two stood in the dim light of the porch as the revelation of what they'd discovered settled heavily between them. Bennett was lost for words. He wanted to comfort her, to let her know that everything was going to be okay, but it felt weak and untrue. Sophie looked up into his eyes. "We have to go back." Bennett stood in shock at her words. "What are you saying, Soph? You want to go back there?" He kept his voice low, but there was panic in his voice as he glanced over his shoulder toward the empty street. "After what you just told me?" Sophia wrapped her arms around herself, as if warding off a chill, and nodded her head. "Because of what I've just told you." Her gaze bore into his, earnest and imploring. "I need to see the rest of those papers to know what we're really dealing with. Otherwise, we're just going through this blind, and I think that's a really bad idea." Bennett raked a hand through his hair, his head spinning. The rational part of him understood what she was saying, but the images of those drawings and the macabre house, with a witch house hidden inside, was just too much, and a strong, insidious warning was taking a grip on him. Even if we did go back, what good will it do? We don't know anything about this kind of stuff. We're in over our heads here, Soph. This is some seriously messed up shit. Sophia took his hand, her fingers cold and trembling slightly. I know, but I need to translate the rest of the pages to at least understand what we're dealing with. Maybe there's a way to keep things respectful to her, to protect ourselves. Her eyes searched his, pleading. We can't just ignore this, Ben. I can feel it. This isn't something we can turn our backs on. Bennett frowned in worry. You're getting awfully deep with this. Why do you keep saying her? Sophie paused at that for a moment. Well, I mean, it's obvious. She was a witch. Bennett shook his head. Couldn't anyone have written those pages? What if it was the guy in that picture? She shook her head. It wasn't. Look, I don't know how to explain it, but I just know. She was a witch, and we need to go back and put things right for her. She looked deep into his eyes. Please. Bennett sighed. He knew, with a grim certainty, that she would go alone if he didn't agree to join her, and he would follow Sophia into any abyss, if only to keep her safe. Okay, we'll go back. He squeezed her hand, a silent promise. But I need Smutty's help to get those walls open. Sophia nodded, relief and apprehension wearing on her delicate features. Yes, and when you talk to him, ask him to meet us early at your house. Okay. Bennett leaned in, brushing a kiss against her chilled lips. The gesture felt weighted, in a fleeting moment of warmth against the encroaching darkness. He stepped back reluctantly, uncertain of what he was feeling from her. Sophia hugged herself tighter, a small, brave smile on her lips. Be careful going home, and thank you for believing me. He returned her smile, hoping it conveyed a confidence he didn't quite feel. Always. See you in the morning. As Bennett walked home, the shadows seemed to deepen around him, and the night air felt hot and thick, cloying, like a physical manifestation of the dread coiling in his gut. Sophie was acting very strangely, but after what they had seen today, he was too shaken up himself to put his finger on it, and he hoped that whatever they found tomorrow would settle this once and for all. The morning sun was in his eyes when the vibration of his phone startled Bennett, so much that he almost crashed his bike. He fumbled for the device as Smutty's name flashed up at him, the time beneath reading 7:52 a.m. Yo, where you at? Smutty's voice was tinged with impatience. You said to meet up early, but now you ain't here? Bennett's hands were covered in sweat, along with the rest of him. Hold on. He finally disconnected the phone from the drone controller, and he turned on the intercom. Smut, hey, I'm on the way home now. What's wrong with your voice, bro? You sound out of breath. Smutty couldn't hide the impish sarcasm in the implication. Just stay there. Hey, is Sophie there yet? No, I thought you were over there. Wait, here she comes now. Bennett let out a sigh of relief. Okay, good. You two just stay put, and I'll be there in 10 minutes or so. What's going on? Why are you breathing so hard? I'll tell you when I get there. My phone is about to die. Just stay there. The ride back to his house passed in a blur, his mind reeling with what he had just seen. When he finally pulled into his driveway, he was out of breath and pale, his heart pounding against his ribs. Sophia ran to him, her eyes wide. Ben, what's going on? He let the bike fall to the ground, setting his drone controller down with shaking hands. His mother appeared from the kitchen door, her brow creasing with concern. Bennett, is everything okay? Hands on his knees, he shook his head, the words sticking in his throat. Someone got killed last night. Everyone went still, the weight of his statement hanging in the air like a physical thing. Oh my God! His mother's face twisted in horror and concern. Who? Smutty blurted out. What? Sophia's voice was barely a whisper, her face drained of color. Bennett swallowed hard, trying to organize his racing thoughts. I woke up early and couldn't fall back asleep, so I flew the drone out. He looked at his mother and chose his next words carefully. I was just flying around, and then I saw police cars. A bunch of them, all around the old farm road. Sophia's eyes were wide. That was the road that led to the abandoned house. I flew closer. I know I shouldn't have, but I wanted to see. His voice cracked, the memory rising up to choke him. There was a sheet, and the blood. He closed his eyes, fighting back a wave of nausea. It was soaked through and splashed all over the ground. Sophia made a small sound, her hands coming up to cover her mouth. Bennett's mother looked stricken, her eyes darting between them with growing alarm. Okay, all three of you inside right now. Bennett kept describing what happened. I brought the drone back and grabbed my bike. I don't know what I was thinking, I had to know. Bennett dragged in a shuddering breath, forcing himself to continue. But when I got there, the cops stopped me, told me to turn around and go home. Did they say what happened? His mother asked, her voice trembling. Bennett shook his head. No, but I heard one of their radios. He met Sophia's gaze, seeing his own fear reflected in her eyes. They said it was an animal attack. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. An animal attack? Here? In their quiet little town? Where nothing ever happened? Except now, it had, and Bennett knew with a sinking feeling that it was tied to what they had found. A stunned silence settled over the room, the weight of Bennett's words sinking in like a stone. His mother pressed a hand against her chest, her face pale. Dear God, she whispered. I can call out. I should stay home. No! His shout made everyone jump. Sorry, I mean, no. It's okay. I'm just a little shocked, but I'm alright. You have to go. You can't risk losing your job. I'll be okay. She went back and forth over it in her head, but there was no getting around what Bennett had said about risking her job. His mother sighed. Right, but you three stay inside today. You hear me? No wandering off until we find out what's going on. They nodded mutely, watching as she gathered her purse with nervous hands and hurried out the door. Text me the minute you hear anything. Bennett nodded. I will. She shook her head and left. The sound of her car starting up seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet house. As soon as his mother pulled out of the driveway, Bennett slumped onto the couch. He felt like he'd aged 10 years in the last couple of hours. Beside him, Sophia reached out and took his hand, her fingers icy cold. What are we going to do? Sophie whispered, her voice low but determined. I need to catch my breath, and you need to explain everything to Smutty that you told me last night. Sophie nodded. Yeah, she explained all of it, and when she was finished with what she had told Bennett, she added everything else that she had looked up after he left. Smutty was uncharacteristically silent as she explained it all, but when she was done, he looked at Bennett. And you think what you saw this morning is connected to this? Bennett paused at that, unsure of how to describe what he was feeling. I honestly have no idea, but I do know that we've never had an animal attack here before. He pointed to Sophie's phone. And those papers are talking about taking revenge on trespassers. Smutty's face was pale now. Bro, we were the trespassers. Bennett nodded. Maybe, but we didn't hurt anything or disturb anything. Not really. We were careful to put everything back the way that it was, and we left quietly. Smutty liked his point. Yeah, okay, that's true. We didn't hurt anything. Bennett continued. What if we weren't the only people to go into the house? The door is unlocked. Anyone can just walk right in. What if, he choked on his words, what if the person under that sheet had also trespassed and done something to the house, to her stuff? Smutty shook his head. I don't know, that's a lot of what ifs. We need to find out who was under that sheet and what happened. Bennett smirked. Sheriff Hanlon didn't look like he wanted to share that information with me earlier. We'll be able to tell if someone else went into the house. Sophie's voice was calm. Smutty lifted his brows in surprise. You want to go back? We have a body on the ground, cops everywhere, witch warnings that you translated yourself, and you want to go trespass again. It's the only way. Bennett's voice was less calm, but just as resolute. You too? Smutty was genuinely shocked. Look, I usually do the stupid shit around here, and I kind of pride myself on being an expert on that subject. What you two are talking about is stupid. We have to know. Sophie looked at him. Who knows when we'll hear anything from the police? And even when we do, there won't be any details. The only way we're going to know if this has anything to do with the house is if we go back. And if I can read the rest of those papers, I'll know exactly what's going on and what to do about it. Well, shit. Smutty paced the room, unhappy with her logic. What if the cops are over there now? I doubt they'll invite us in for a quick peek. Let's find out. Bennett fit his phone back into the drone controller, and within moments, the device was thrumming through the air, gaining altitude. After a few minutes, he could see the line of blue lights on the farm road, but so far, it didn't look like they were anywhere near the house. Smutty asked, How close are they? Bennett swallowed. Not that close, but we can't take the road. We'll have to walk through the woods. Smutty groaned. So, what's the plan? We're just gonna pop in to see if anyone else has been there, or anything has been disturbed, and then leave, right? And get pictures of the rest of the pages. Sophie paused. And make sure that the bones aren't disturbed. Sophie's voice had dropped to just above a whisper as she said the words they had all been thinking. Smutty rubbed his face with his hands, his legs feeling like rubber. I can't believe we're doing this. Okay, fuck it. Let's go. As they entered through the back door, the house seemed undisturbed, exactly as they'd left it yesterday. Sophia took Bennett's hand and headed straight for the stairs to the library, her jaw set with determination. Bennett and Smutty exchanged glances. Then Smutty followed them up. The papers were still scattered across the table, just as they had left them. Sophia began to arrange them so that she could get pictures, laying them out in order and hovering over them, each with her phone. When she was done, she placed them back exactly as she had found them. There was a claustrophobic sense of unease in the place, different than it had been yesterday. Sophie looked at the other two and began to walk slowly toward the stairs and the witch house that awaited. The hidden doorway in the hall was undisturbed, and they slid it open more easily this time. Nobody had moved the key from the roll-top desk where Bennett had replaced it yesterday. He took it and walked back to fit the key into the lock, and it clicked open smoothly. Bennett pushed the door open into the darkness. They had 2 flashlights this time, with bright, powerful beams that cut through the inky shadows and illuminated the front of the witch's house. Smutty stepped in, whispering, Let's get this over with and get the hell out of here. The door to the cabin was just as they had left it, and Sophie reached out, slowly pulling it open, so that the others could shine their lights inside. The shelves were as they remembered, lined with a myriad of bottles and objects. The bird's wings and sticks hanging from the ceiling were frozen in the stillness, and in the center of the room sat the large, hand-hewn table that the bones were arranged. The table now sat empty. Bennett's blood froze before he jerked and frantically panned the light all around. His breath was stuck in his throat, and he had to make himself breathe. Smutty's light danced around the room as well, and the impulse to run hammered through all of their veins. Smutty spun and shined the light outside of the cabin, bouncing the circle of light off the walls and all around. There was no question that they needed to leave right now, and Bennett reached for Sophie, who was frozen, staring at the table when the floor above their heads groaned as if weight were being put on it. The 3 froze and looked up. The sound came again. Smutty was halfway back to the door in the hall, and Bennett was leaving the house when he heard the rustle of papers behind him. He spun to see Sophie, hastily fitting the stacks of sheets into her pack. Soph, he began, but she cut him off with a sharp shake of her head. He wanted to argue, but the sound from above came again as she stuffed the last of the stack in her bag. She pivoted toward the door, and they sprinted the rest of the distance. Bennett pulled the door closed, but didn't bother to lock it as he and Smutty quickly pushed the section of the wall back into place. The sound from upstairs came again, heavier than before. "Hurry!" Sophie's whisper was in full panic, and as soon as the wall was snug, they ran down the hall, into the kitchen, and out of the door. The air outside felt like freedom. They all gave into the adrenaline pumping through their veins and sprinted towards the wood line. Smutty had the presence of mind to look back to see if they were being followed, and saw the first truck from the sheriff's department round the bend of the driveway. "Down!" He caught Sophie's pack and pulled her to the ground and behind the tall grass. The three watched from cover as the two vehicles parked and deputies stepped out and walked up to the door. Bennett felt like his heart was going to jump out of his chest as they watched the men knock on the door, but nothing happened. After a moment, the officers walked towards the back of the house. "We need to get the hell out of here." Smutty's voice was tight with strain as he pulled Bennett's arm. There was no argument as the three scuttled into the woods so that they wouldn't be seen, and as soon as it was safe to get up, they ran like hell. Sheriff Jeff Hanlon stood motionless in the light breeze that stirred the crime scene tape. He had sent deputies to the old house at the end of the road to see if anyone had been there. "Appreciate you putting up the tent, Sheriff," came the measured voice of medical examiner Shannon Temerson, her gaze never leaving the macabre display beneath the blue tarps. "Figured it was best," Hanlon replied, his voice terse as he adjusted the brim of his hat against the glare of the morning sun. Temerson nodded, her dowdy brown jacket rustling as she crouched beside the body. Her hands were steady as she worked, unaffected by the gruesome sight before her. "Time of death looks to be around 3 a.m, give or take," she stated, clinically. "Any ideas as to what happened?" Hanlon asked. "Hard to say just yet," she admitted, her eyes scanning torn flesh. "But if I had to guess, I'd agree that it appears to be some kind of animal attack. But it was bigger than anything we should have in these parts." A chill ran down Hanlon's spine as he considered her words. An animal attack was worrisome enough, but something unaccounted for in the local fauna was another level of concern altogether. He liked the sleepy peace that he usually maintained, and whatever was out there had just shattered that to pieces. "I'll be right back," he said, turning to see Deputy Cray walking towards him. "We should get a hunting party together." Cray's hand instinctively rested on his holstered weapon as he spoke, a sheen of sweat on his brow, betraying his nerves. "Easy now," Hanlon said, his voice steady but firm, a counterpoint to Cray's agitation. "We can't go in guns blazing when we don't even know what we're looking for." He glanced over at the tent. The bright blue, a stark contrast against the green and brown hues of the forest. "Stay off the radio for now. Stand guard. Make sure no one else gets close." Cray nodded, though his eyes still darted around, searching the woods for movement. Hanlon could see the younger man's mind working overtime, inventing horrors that hid behind every shadow, and the sheriff knew that if this was the reaction a trained deputy was having, everyone else would have the same or worse. It was Hanlon's job to prevent imagination from dictating action. Patience had to be their ally now, not panic. Turning back to the tent, Hanlon stepped closer, his nausea rising at the metallic scent of the blood that surrounded the space. Hanlon lowered his voice. "I'm going to need whatever you can tell me sooner rather than later." Temerson replied without looking up, focused on a particularly deep gash. "Take a look at this." Hanlon moved in closer. The body was torn apart with such ferocity that it barely retained human form. Claw marks gouged the flesh, and massive bite marks punctured the skin with multiple bite marks. But there was an eerie absence of any sign that the victim had been fed on. Predators don't typically kill just for the sport of it, Temerson said in a hushed tone, her words echoing Hanlon's thoughts. This wasn't feeding, this was something else. Could be territorial, Hanlon suggested, though the notion felt hollow even as he spoke it. In all his years as sheriff, he'd never seen any animal claim this place its territory, and certainly nothing this large. Maybe, Temerson conceded, her tone indicating she wasn't convinced either. As the sun rose and the heat set in, flies had begun to buzz in a frenzied dance around the carnage. The victim's long, dark hair fanned out on the ground. "Any ID yet?" Hanlon asked, his eyes tracing the lines of dirt and blood that streaked across the victim's dark clothes. "Nothing," Temerson replied. "Pockets are empty, no wallet, no phone, no loose change or receipts." "Distinctive look, though," he mused, standing upright, his eyes popping in protest. "Someone's got to know this guy. Long hair, all dressed up like some kind of goth." Temerson looked at him, snapping off her rubber gloves with professional detachment. "A goth who likes visiting new towns and walks down country roads in the middle of the night?" "Doesn't make sense," Hanlon muttered, both to himself and the medical examiner, his gray mustache twitching in thought. "If you're done here, let's get this poor soul back to your office. Maybe you'll find something that can tell us more about him, or what did this." "Hopefully both," Temerson replied, signaling her assistants to prepare the body for transport. As the team worked with quiet efficiency, Hanlon pushed his cowboy hat back, squinting into the sun that seemed to mock them with its bright indifference. In his 11 years as sheriff, he'd seen death wear many faces, but it had never left claw marks before.